All right, welcome everyone. Holding by the Book of Leviticus Chapter 16. Again, want to welcome everyone by the Book of Leviticus Chapter 16. And we spoke last week and the week before about the death of the two sons of Aaron. And last week we got into detail about this whole question: what's the reason they died? Because we see from Book of Leviticus Chapter 10. We see that, they brought a strange fire. And then it says in verse 8 that they drank wine, right? Not allowed to drink wine while serving in the temple, serving in the Mishkan, right? Then over here, it doesn't mention anything, right? It just says God spoke to Moshe, whole question what he said, right? And he says they drew close, right? So could be, maybe they drew close for another reason, right? Nothing to do with bringing the strange fire, nothing to do with incense, right? Over here could be another reason, right? Which we're going to see. So then we got into the Or Chaim HaKadosh. The Or Chaim, we mentioned that they brought down a Korban Aaron, right? Again, I'm not exactly sure who that is, but the Korban Aaron says that, someone who's very close to the king, if they do something wrong, even something minor, right, the punishment is very severe, right? We spoke about that. We spoke about, the idea of converts, Noahites having a difficult time, right? The process of conversion or staying as a Noahite, etc. So we're going to continue. We're going to continue with this Or Chaim HaKadosh. We'll see how far we get. It's pretty long over here. Whatever, we'll see. Now, the Or Chaim over here asks another question, right? Or he tries to understand, what they died for. What was the reason? So he says that, what do we see? And he said there's an idea they died because of what Aaron did by the sin of the golden calf. In other words, the sons get punished. Moshe Rabbeinu prays that nothing bad should come out of it. And he prayed for all four sons, and he only had the power to save two. Right? The other two sons got saved, but not Nadav and Avihu. So now, says Or Chaim HaKadosh, he says that we mentioned that could be for the sin of the golden calf. The sin of the golden calf, they died. How do I know? Right? How do I know? Says the Or Chaim HaKadosh. I got a verse. Right? Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 20. Right? What's the Torah there? Tell me. Torah says, Hashem became very angry with Aaron to destroy him. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, so I prayed for Aaron at that time. Okay, very good. But what happens? He prayed for him, and Aaron got saved, and two of his sons died. So the Or Chaim HaKadosh here brings down a medrash. And what does the medrash say? It says over there that God was angry at Aaron. And he wanted to wipe him out. To destroy him. And Moshe Rabbeinu prayed. He prayed over here. So what happened? It says the Medrash. What does it mean? He was going to get wiped out. Not necessarily Aaron. There was some small sin, whatever it was, by sin of the golden calf. Right? If you go through the verses over there, very hard to understand. He was trying to stall, did all kinds of things. He knew Moshe Rabbeinu was coming back, whatever the case is. And technically, really, you want to pin him down over here. He didn't really do anything wrong. Commentaries there go to town trying to explain, but certainly he didn't do anything wrong. The Jews were not over idolatry. They didn't transgress idolatry. They bend over backwards to try and show why that's not the case. And the reason would be very simple, right? The reason would be very simple because if you look at the Jewish people getting the Torah, the ones that survived in Egypt, came out of Egypt, 20%. 20% survived, got the Torah Mount Sinai, which we're going to read this week. They get the Torah Mount Sinai. The first two of the 10 commandments, they died, come back to life. Some say it was by all the 10 commandments. Whatever it is. He's talking about a very high level. A very high level. And that's where the Jewish people got to. They got to such a high level that it was like before Adam and Eve ate from the tree. It comes on Mr. S. Satan, the evil inclination, the angel of death, whatever you want to call him. So what did he do? Shows a picture in heaven of a casket, Moshe Rabbeinu in the casket, saying that Moshe Rabbeinu is dead. So what do they do? So now they say, okay, we want someone else. We want some other intermediary. So now someone will say, but it wasn't really the Jewish people who sinned over here. It was the Arab. It was a mixed multitude. Converts came out of Egypt or other places. Whatever it is, doesn't really matter. But they're at the highest level that the world has been, before Adam and Eve sinned. And that's where the Messiah should have come, or had the potential to come right then. It comes on Mr. S and says, no dice. There's no dice over here. Then I'm not going to allow that to happen. And he brought the world back down with the sin of the golden calf. Now, comes on the Torah. The Torah says that God's angry. God wanted to destroy Aaron and Cohen. Moshe Rabbeinu prayed. Right? Moshe Rabbeinu prayed for him. It comes on the Medrash. Says Rabbi Chaim HaKadosh. What does it mean that he's supposed to be wiped out? That is the death of his son. Meaning, God wasn't going to wipe out Aaron over here. Right? He's going to wipe out Aaron for a different reason. Right? By hitting the rock or by not sanctifying God's name. Right? So, that we'll see one day. I don't know when, but, one day we'll get there. Regardless who's supposed to die over here, says the Medrash. The sons. Aaron's sons. So Moshe Rabbeinu davens. Moshe Rabbeinu prays over here. But his prayers only helped half. They only helped half his sons. Because we know that two of his sons died. And not only that, says Rabbi Chaim HaKadosh over here, that two sons died because of the sin of the golden calf, because of what Aaron did. Whatever level, whatever small level, very hard to imagine. If you go back, and you look at the story, what he did, he was stalling at best. He knew, that Moshe Rabbeinu was coming back. He knew that Moshe Rabbeinu was one who took him out of Egypt and all that, and all the miracles. The people also knew, but you know what they say? God, where have you been for me lately? Where's Moshe? Oh, Moshe disappeared. Oh, we need an intermediary. So Aaron first thinks, he said, okay, tell the women to give all the jewelry. Like, you think it's going to, do you really think women are going to, they're going to give away, to give up all the jewelry? So that was pretty shocking, right? That was a pretty shocking thing. Regardless, then they throw it into the fire, it comes out this calf, and all that. So basically, he's trying to stall. And then they say, this is the one who took us out of Egypt. Now again, if they're at such a high level, at the giving of the Torah, they saw God face to face, whatever that means. How is it possible? Not my question. Commentary's asking, but the basic question. How is it possible the Jewish people fall so fast? Very hard to understand. Because we understand this is the greatest generation in the history of man. The greatest generation. Right? So now you want to tell me. They sinned straight away. Because Moshe Rabbeinu comes back late or they think he died. Right? Whatever the case is. How is it possible? Right? How in the world is it possible? Very hard to understand. Nonetheless, Aaron is taking a task. He's taking a task over here. And we see also that when Aaron dies, he doesn't die for this sin. per se, or for this small part of the sin, whatever. Right? Even though God wanted to punish him, so instead of punishing him, punishes his sons. Also has to be understood. Why? What the sons do over here. Comes to sin of the golden calf, they never have anything to do with it. Seemingly they didn't have anything to do with it. We've come up with 6 different reasons that the Talmud says that God's going to take them. Any number of reasons. Right? The sin of the golden calf is not one of them. Seemingly is not one of them. Right? We saw a couple weeks ago by the Rabbi Chaim, and he brings down 6 reasons. Right? Either they entered the Mishkan, they were impure, they brought a strange fire, they drank wine, they gave over halach in front of their Rebbe, they didn't get married, and they got too close to Mount Sinai when the Torah is being given. Now, if you look at that, you look at those 6 reasons, one of the reasons is not because of the sin of golden calf. Right? But we see, it's for whatever reason it's not mentioned. Need further clarification why Talmud doesn't mention it there. Nonetheless, mentioned over here. Torah says clear. God wanted to punish him. God wanted to punish him for this. And Moshe Rabbeinu came to the rescue. Only problem is, he saved Aaron, but his 2 sons died. Now, comes along Rabbi Chaim over here and says, the 2 sons died as an atonement for their father. Right? In other words, the altar needed atonement over here. Needed atonement. Now, in general, as the Torah says, kids will pay for the sins of the father. So people will say, come on, it's not fair. Why should kids suffer because of what the parents did? Because of what the father did. Right? So one answer Talmud gives is that if a child goes in the bad ways of the father, then they're going to pay the price. They're going to pay the price for the sin of the father. If they don't go in the same way, in other words, they go in the proper way, doesn't matter what the father did over here. If the son goes in the proper way, that curse doesn't apply. Totally doesn't apply. Now, we do see there is something they did wrong. Even though they were great, as we're going to see, maybe even greater than Moshe and Aaron, Aaron's 2 sons. But even so, what do we see over here? We see that they pay the price for the father, for what the father did. So if we go back, and we say what the Korban Aaron said, that the closer you are to the king, you can be very close, but you get burnt. Now, there are a number of things that they did. It's hard to understand which one they're necessarily liable for. But according to this opinion, what are we talking about? Talking about the sin of the golden calf. And they're going to pay that price. They're going to pay that price. Now, what's the obvious question? Sin of the golden calf not mentioned. That's the question. It's not mentioned. It comes along the Rabbi Chaim and he asks, but don't ask. Doesn't the Medrash say why they die? Because they came too close. According to one opinion, they came too close to the mountain, right? With the giving of the Torah. Or according to the one that they brought a strange fire. So what are you telling me? Right? What are you telling me over here? Doesn't make any sense. For the sin of the golden calf. Either you tell me they came too close to the mountain and given the Torah Mount Sinai, or they brought a strange fire. Strange fire. Incense when they shouldn't have. They went into the Holy of Holies, whatever it was. But why in the world tell me it has to do with the sin of the golden calf? Now, comes on the Rabbi Chaim, Akadosh, and he says, if not for the sake of the sin of their fathers, It would have been saved. God would have had mercy. God would have had mercy over you. Interesting. That was the final blow. The fact that Aaron, whatever the sin was, however minute the sin was by the sin of the golden calf, meaning his role in the sin of the golden calf. Seemingly, if you read the verses, he didn't have such a role over here. You try to push them off, buying time, this, that, and Moshe Rabbeinu tells them when he comes down to what's going on over here. He tells them what happened. Right? But here he's taking a task. He's taking a task. So says the Rabbi Chaim HaKadosh, you know what? Had it not been for the sin of the golden calf, and that Aaron, really should have been killed. So God had mercy. He didn't take him. He took two of his sons. He took the cream of the crop. He took the roses. Absolutely took the cream of the crop. Right? So says the Rabbi Chaim HaKadosh here, but what about the other sins? What are the other sins liable for? Potentially liable for? Bringing a strange fire, drawing too close to the mountain. Right? So what can we say? We can say you're right, but maybe that's why they weren't liable. Maybe there's something else going on. Maybe it's because of the sin of the golden calf. So he's telling you over here, as a chesed, God wouldn't have taken him. He wouldn't have taken his two sons for the sin of the golden calf. Might have taken it for other reasons, but not for that. Right? So the Rabbi Chaim HaKadosh seems to say that was the final blow. That God said, okay, go to the sin of the golden calf, now I'm going to take them. What about the other things they did? Potentially that they did. That they shouldn't have done. Right? So it needs further clarification. Then the Rabbi Chaim HaKadosh further. Now, there's also a medrash that says, why were they taken? They were taken to sanctify God's name. Right? Sometimes you get righteous people that God wants to sanctify his name through them. So he takes them. But make no mistake. Even if we say that their death was an atonement, right? We're not going to mix in Christian ideas here. They're not living in this world to atone for the sins of everyone else. There's no white person lives. That's not the role of a Jew. In other words, if we have an obligation to sanctify God's name, we have to be ready. We have to be willing. Right? We have to be willing to give up our lives for any of the big three, let's say. Idolatry, murder, and immorality. So a Jew or non-Jew would put a gun to a Jew's head and say, I want you to bow down to this guy in the stick, right? A reference to JC, right? Or show the fat guy. Mr. Buddha himself to say, hey, bow down to fat. So they probably won't say that, but we're going to make fun of idolatry anyway. Big mitzvah to make fun of idolatry. Say, hey, bow down to fat so over here, or we're going to kill you. And what's the halacha? You have to die. You're not allowed to. You're not allowed to. If you don't sanctify God's name, you transgress the Torah prohibition. Now, based on that, what about a non-Jew? Does a non-Jew have an obligation to sanctify God's name? No. Doesn't apply to them. If they want to, is that called suicide? That's a good question. They gave up their life when they didn't have to. Could be, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Right? But what is the Rabbi Chaim here telling us? He's telling us their death was an atonement. The death of the righteous is an atonement for the generation. But are the righteous alive? Are they living? Are they living for that? That's not what they're here for. 100%, that's not what they're here for. Right? They're not interested in that. If it happens that that's the case, they'll do that. 100% they'll do that. But the reality is nobody wants it. Nobody's interested. Right? So, if it comes to that, that's a different issue. Right? And a person has to be willing to give up their life. And if they don't, 100%, 100% the Torah prohibition. So what does the person have to do? The person has to be ready and willing to sacrifice their life. Now, how does God convince a soul to go in the body and convince the soul, to sanctify God's name in, a horrific death? How does God convince the soul to do that? So what does God show the soul? God shows the soul the unbelievable reward it's going to get for dying such a death. So this soul is a soldier, so to speak. So, okay, I'm ready. Now the soul goes in the body. Soul's never going to remember. The body's never going to remember. Right? Totally never going to remember what it's here for. Now, going through that, that's an atonement. That's it. But how does God get the soul to do that? It's an interesting question. So he shows him all the reward for going through that, and the soul agrees. Right? That's basically how it works. Soul agrees. Soul will agree over here. Now, so over here we're saying it's an atonement. So we have to be prepared 100% that this could happen. And there are many Jews throughout the millennium that died rather than kiss the cross. So the ones that gave different answers, different philosophical answers, why it was permissible to bow down, and not die. What happened to their families? Their families assimilated. Nothing left of their family. The ones who were willing to die because this is what our obligation is, their family stayed intact. Torah got passed down. Right? Through the self-sacrifice. Now, the famous story, while we're on this topic, we mentioned about Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, when he said the Shema, is always bothered by the second verse of the Shema. First verse of the Shema, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Right, God, you should love the Lord your God. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. That's the first verse. And then the second verse, we say is V'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha, kol vavcha, kol nafshecha, kol meodecha. You love the Lord your God with all your soul, with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might, with all your means. However you want to translate it, let's go back to soul. Right? So when we say the Shema, we say, B'kol nafshecha, with your soul. Come along, Rabbi Akiva. As the Talmud tells us at the end of Tractate Brachos. So the Talmud tells us, Rabbi Akiva is always bothered by this verse. Why is he bothered by this verse? Because Rabbi Akiva held that we should be ready at all times to sanctify our lives. Right? Sanctify our lives for God. Then he got caught for teaching Torah in public. And, basically they're killing him. He's giving a whole sermon to his students. What do he say? He says, bothered by this verse. When am I going to sanctify God's name? And all that. Meanwhile, they're cutting him up. And at the end, he says, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And then he dies. What does the Talmud say after that? Talmud says, Rabbi Akiva is muchen in the next world. Right? Is welcome in the next world. But his student said, Ad Kam, this is what it means. This is what the verse means. So Rabbi Akiva said, yeah, that's what it means. Now the rabbis disagreed. Rabbis disagreed with him. Right? In other words, he was living his life waiting to sacrifice his life. Who says we have to live our lives ready to sacrifice our lives? Who says that's what I'm looking forward to? Or, that's my obligation. So it comes out that if that is the case, and that happens, we have to be willing to die. Jews have to be willing to die rather than kiss the cross, rather than murder someone, rather than commit an immoral act. So we have to be ready. Does that mean, I'm ready right now, or any Jew is ready, sacrifice God's name? What we'd rather do? We'd rather live sanctifying God's name. That's a lot more difficult. Person dies sanctifying God's name. Dies in one shot. Right? Dies in one shot. It's a lot harder to live that idea. A lot harder. Beis Yosef also. Right? Rav Yosef Karo, the organizer of Shulchan Aruch, also wanted to die sanctifying God's name. And he saw that wasn't happening. And an angel that he learned with told him, God doesn't want you to die that way. Right? He wants you to live sanctifying God's name. Right? So over here, it was considered an atonement. When a righteous person dies, we have to understand there could have been a catastrophe for the Jewish people. So, instead of taking 100,000 Jews, God forbids, so he takes one righteous person, takes two righteous people. Right? It's an atonement. Now, obviously, we don't want that. We don't want, God's plucking the best, so to speak. But at the end of the day, as we said before, the closer you are to the king, you get burnt. So you can say, but it's not fair. Look at the history of the Jewish people. Right? Look at the history. We've been gassed. We've been murdered. And property stolen, all kinds of things. All kinds of things. So, so the Christians will say, you know why that is? Because you killed our Savior. Yeah, good luck to that. All right. Even if it's true we killed him, so what? That God's gonna rank out that punishment for so long, so many people die in his name. No, I don't think so. But if you're close to the king, and you are supposed to do what you're supposed to do, you get burnt. You can easily get burnt. So I would ask the question, if we know that to be true, and we know that, every second of every day that we wake up, either I'm doing the right thing or, God forbid, doing the wrong thing, has absolute meaning, right? Gives us meaning in life. All our actions are judged, and God's going to judge us where we're holding, what we did, what we thought, all these things. Or would a person say, you know what? I'd rather take fantasy. I'll just live fantasy. Fantasy is easy. I don't have to think as much. Stuff happens. I want to have a good time. I'll give it to my evil inclination, and that's it. So there are plenty of people out there who will take fantasy. They want fantasy. Why? Because to think about truth is hard. And to see a world seeming to go upside down, right, seems hard in so many different ways. You saw yesterday, right? The synagogue taking a hostage. It's just interesting. If you look at history, I don't think there's any question about it. And that's why anyone who wants to join the Jewish people, as my Rebbe would say, either they are the real deal and they'll do whatever it takes to get there, or you guys are a bunch of wackos. You know why I say wackos? Because look what the Jewish people have gone through. They've been gassed, they've been murdered, they've been expelled, they've been butchered, they've been tortured, right? We are the most persecuted nation ever, as we would say in Boston. Ever. Most persecuted. Nothing to talk about. No one comes close. Nobody. Not the Chinese, not the blacks, not Puerto Ricans. All of them combined with everything they've gone through, and are not whitewashing it. Not saying they didn't go through suffering. Compared to the suffering of the Jewish people throughout the millennium, not even close. Not even close. Someone comes in, takes these people hostage in the middle of prayers. Okay, it's a Reformed synagogue. You say what you want, right? Of all places, right? I'm not saying things don't happen in churches. They can happen in churches also. People will get blown up and killed or whatever. But, we've seen over the last number of years, a bunch of places have been hit. Now, I'm not going to go deeper into saying why I think. Doesn't really matter what I think. Right? When I say it's a Reformed synagogue, they deserted, they had it coming. I'm not going to say that. Right? We don't know. It'll probably come out. Different things going on there. Who knows? Doesn't really matter. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's a microcosm. It's a microcosm of the Jewish people. Right? We don't do the right thing. There are a lot of things that God hates, right? One of them is immorality. Certainly immorality. God can't stand idolatry. Many times the Torah says, he can't stand and he wants it destroyed. He wants it uprooted. Comes on the Rambam. And the Rambam says there's even an obligation to uproot idolatry. Where? Everywhere. Not just in Israel. Yeah, you say, if I do that, I'm going to go to jail. Okay, so it might not apply. But he's telling you the importance of the obligation. So now, if we go back, we see all these events, right? You can say, why is everybody always picking on me? Why? People not outrightly religious. I don't care if they went to synagogue. These people probably not keeping kosher, not keeping Shabbos, all these different things. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Like Hitler, Yamach Shemoy, V'Zichroi. May his name be blotted out. As long as you had Jewish blood, he wanted to kill you. Didn't matter. Half Jewish blood, quarter Jewish blood. Right? Because we're all intertwined. Right? There's the Talmud says, Kol Yisrael Arabim Zelazim. We're all intertwined. Totally intertwined. Right? So if a person does something wrong, a Jew does something wrong, those Jewish people, can get punished collectively, or a portion, or whatever, all kinds of things. All kinds of things. You're going to say it's an awesome responsibility. Yeah, it is. It's a tremendous responsibility. Right? That no one disagrees. But sometimes, we do such terrible things. The God says, okay, you know what I'm going to do? Really, I should annihilate most of the Jewish people. That's what I should do. You know what? I'm going to have mercy. I'm going to have mercy over here. So instead of doing that, what does God do? He says, I'm going to take the cream of the crop. I'm going to take the cream of the crop. Somebody mentions that the rabbi is known for his interfaith work. Okay? Listen, there's nothing that goes unpunished. Right? But let's understand. Let's understand. Anti-Semitism exists. Esav hates Yaakov, and it's always going to be that way. Whether it makes sense, it doesn't make sense. I heard something this morning, about a father whose son, died in Meron, one of the 45 sacrifices in Meron, right, last year. And, you hear stories, and stories came out of all these people. These were not just individuals, right? Not, we're not saying, they were over glorified, just looking for their good points. These were the cream of the crop. Right? Story after story. It's heart-wrenching. Heart-wrenching. Kids, adults, young marrieds, across the board. People thrown into chaos. I heard something this morning. I didn't break by it, but it's very sad. One thing is someone's evil. They get caught doing other things, whatever. Okay, they get what they deserve. When someone is the cream of the crop and they're plucked early, that's hard. Or a young child gets a terrible disease and suffer tremendously in the family and all that. Tremendous amount of suffering that the Jewish people have gone through. Problem is, comes on the coming of the Messiah, right? Someone said, we don't want to see, right? Rabbi Yochanan said, I don't want to be alive during the birth pains of the Messiah. Now you ask the question, why? Rabbi Yochanan had 10 sons that died. He had 10 sons that died. They say that he used to console people. He used to walk around with the bone of one of his sons. One of his sons that died. Now, hard to imagine this impurity, whatever, without even going into all that. Right? What's the idea? The Jewish people have suffered so much. They continue to suffer. Right? There's no question. We continue to suffer. And no matter what happens, by the end of days, we're also going to suffer tremendously. That's the way it seems. No free lunch over here. There could be things going on. The only thing you're going to have to do is pray. And hopefully we'll survive. Hopefully we'll survive. But when you think about it, you tear out your hair. Well, at least I don't have that much to tear out. But, a person tear out his hair. and you say, God should have mercy. Fine, you want to take evil people, they don't care, so wipe them out. They deserve a lot more than we do, but guess what? The Rabbi Chaim has already brought down a Korban Aaron. The Korban Aaron said, the closer you are to the king, for better, for worse, the closer you are to the king, the more you're going to get wiped out by a small infraction. So again, if we had the choice to sign up for fantasy, do whatever we want, nothing has any meaning, no repercussions, or I sign up for something where I could get burnt, but every second of my day and every second of my life has meaning, right? So there are a lot of people sign up for fantasy. A lot of people sign up for fantasy, but the ones who are going to be the real deal, they're going to sign up for the latter. They're going to sign up for the more difficult life. You know why? Because that means I got to be careful what I say. It means I have to be careful what I see. It means I have to be careful what I do. And God forbids we don't do what we're supposed to do properly. What does God come and do? What does God come and do? God can come and take away the cream of the crop. Right? That's what he can do. He can take away the cream of the crop. Right? Now, are we interested in that? We're not interested. We're totally not interested. But if that's what happens, it could be. It could be that righteous people are taken, and you had the 45 in Meron, and then, a few weeks later, a few other people, similar thing. So what do you see? So you see that there could have been a greater catastrophe, a much greater catastrophe. So God says, you know what? I'm not going to make a greater catastrophe. Really? Because of what you do? I should really take 25,000 people. I should take 100,000 people. So God says, I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to take the cream of the crop. And I'm going to have them die in a not normal way. Now, again, how does the soul sign up for that? Because God shows the soul the merit, the reward it's going to get for going through such a thing. What about all the people left behind? You're right. It's tragedy for them. But this person sanctifies God's name, goes straight to Gan Eden. Right? Straight to God's heavenly throne. So these things we don't understand. We don't understand how to view them. We don't understand what the reasons are. We could give reasons, potential reasons. Just like by the Holocaust, there are a number of potential reasons. We don't know. Nobody knows clear. Writing is on the wall. There's a number of things that make a lot of sense, but okay. Even if it makes sense, we can't say for sure that's the reason. But what we're saying over here, that the Rabbi Chaim says that the sons of Aaron die. You know why they die? It's an atonement for the father. It's an atonement. Because the reality is, really should have been Aaron. For whatever his role was, in the sin of the golden calf. Even if it was minor, that's the whole point over here. Even if it was minor, but at his level, punishment absolutely severe. Right? Punishment absolutely severe. Now, nobody wants this. We're not necessarily signing up for it, but make no mistake. Any Jew is given a choice. Kiss the cross or die, that's our obligation. We have to die. We have to be willing to die. Now, am I living my life for that moment? Rabbi Kiva said yes. And that's what we should do. And the rabbis disagreed. They disagreed. What did they hold? So the rabbis held, we're willing to do that 100%. That's our obligation. But at the end of the day, if it happens, I'll do it. That'll be my obligation. Right? If it doesn't happen, so I live my life however I live my life. Right? That's what we're doing. We'll live our lives the way we should. Nobody wants to go through this. Nobody wants to be accosted, by a mob, by a Christian mob, God forbid. And they say, Jew, you killed our Savior. He said, yeah, we did. Says it explicitly. Gemara and Sanhedrin. Says clear, you're right, we did. Well, we're going to give you a chance. We're going to give you a chance for redemption. Now, they could kill you anyway, but doesn't matter. They give you a chance for redemption. What's the chance for redemption? Kiss the cross, bow down, we'll let you go. Right? Otherwise, we're going to carve you up and make you a science project. So at that point, what's your obligation? Okay, I guess I'm supposed to be a science project. I guess that's what God wants. Because there's no way I'm going to sit there and kiss the cross. That ain't going to happen. And then what happens? They kill you, they kill you. But if they do, have a tremendous portion of the world to come. Right? No question. But I'm just pointing out that we see there can be atonement for someone who dies. Well, we're not saying that someone came to die for all our sins. That's the Christian idea. We're not saying that. We're saying, okay, if I have to go through it, I'll do it. That's my obligation. Not that someone came to die for it. Right? Certainly not. But it's interesting. It's interesting over here that, why did I bring this all up? Never know where I go off on a tangent here. Because the Medrash says, why did they die? They died to sanctify God's name. That's why they died. They died sanctifying God's name. Right? So, says Rabbi Chaim on that. Says Rabbi Chaim HaKadosh. He said, if not been the sin of the golden calf, they'd have been liable anyway. They would have been liable anyway. Because God says, I want to sanctify my name and I'm going to do it through them. Because there are times God's going to pluck the most righteous because he needs sanctification. For whatever reason. Now he says over here, he says this reason is hidden from us. We don't know. It's tremendously hidden and hidden within hiddenness. It says, person has to know, for a righteous person, even something seemingly minor, that for most people wouldn't be considered a sin at all. For them, God's going to bring his wrath. God's going to bring his judgments. Totally bring his judgment over here. So again, what could somebody say? Somebody could say, let the righteous learn. Let the righteous teach. Let them do what they need to do in serving God. And cut them a little bit of slack. But you see, righteous people suffer tremendously. What's the reason? Because it could be they did something, minor fraction of something where by other people it's not a sin, by them it would be considered a sin. And God, is going to take action over here. But we have to understand as well that when a person gets cleansed in this world, right? When we get cleansed in this world, well, guess what? When we go in the next world, we come out squeaky clean. So I'll tell you a famous story. It's only famous, I guess, if you know it. Famous story with the tells of Ilui Reb Mordechai Pogramansky. Reb Mordechai Pogramansky, blessed memory, survived the war many times, miraculously, unbelievable, miraculously. And right after the war, shortly after the war, he got cancer. Right? He was very sick. He was in a tremendous amount of pain. And he was blind, couldn't see. And he heard the doctors wanted to give morphine just to take away some of the pain. So with all his strength, he sat up and he looked up to heaven and he said, God, you can do whatever you want with my body. You can destroy my body. You can rack it with pain. You can do whatever you want, but guess what? This is all going to be an atonement. Right? All the pain I'm going through is for sin, whatever sins I've done. So this is going to be atonement, and I'm coming straight to you to Gan Eden. There ain't going to be no middle path here. I'm not going to suffer because I'm going to take all the suffering now. So I forgot to mention. So he says, okay, give me all the pain. This is what Mordechai Pogormansky said before he died. God, you give me all the pain because I want to go through the suffering and I want to come to you straight to Gan Eden. Straight to the Garden of Eden. No punishments. No suffering in the next world. I'll take all the suffering now. Now, how many people are signing up for that? Probably not too many. Right? Who wants to have their body racked in pain and this and that? But I'll mention one other thing while I'm just on this topic. That if a person's in pain and they're suffering, they have to acknowledge, according to a number of rabbinical authorities, they have to acknowledge the pain they're going through is atonement. Is atonement for sin. If a person goes through pain in this world and they're suffering tremendously, and before they die, they just say, woe to me, suffering tremendously, and all that, but they don't look at it as an atonement for all the sins they've done. They don't get atonement. Death will be an atonement. Not a full atonement, but death will be somewhat of an atonement. And then they'll get judged. But it's only if a person says and admits that all the suffering is because of their sins. If they admit that, then it's an atonement. But someone in general who just suffers, and they go through, a tremendously hard time, if they don't acknowledge where it comes from, it's not an atonement. It might be suffering for no reason, but it's not atonement over here. But it could be tremendous atonement if we have our wits about us saying that, this is for all the sins I've done. Again, no one wants to go through that either. But imagine the cleansing process that it does. And that it saves us from future punishment in the next world. So comes along with Mordechai Pogormansky, blessed memory. Mordechai Pogormansky says, you know what? God, you give me all the pain. I want all the pain right now. Because all the pain right now, I'm coming into the next world, no sins, no punishment. I'm coming straight to you in the Garden of Eden. Now, what's the obvious question? What's the obvious question on that? The obvious question is, who's holding by that? Who's living their lives to that level? So you might say, probably not too many people. Probably not. It doesn't matter. I tell the story for people to understand what levels a person can reach. He didn't live 150 years ago, right? He was a great rabbi of the last generation. Less than 100 years ago. You can say, well, it's not this generation. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. There are great people who live their lives at different levels. Totally different level. So it could be, again, minor infraction, severe punishment. Right? Severe punishment over here. It comes on the Rabbi Chaim, he says, these things are hidden from us. We can't fathom what this is. It's totally hidden from us, but he says a fundamental principle. The fundamental principle is God's ways are totally hidden. But don't think God doesn't know what he's doing. And don't think judgment can be so severe, even for someone extremely righteous. Even if they do something relatively minor. Right now, if we think in those terms, then wouldn't that mean in theory, for us little people, wouldn't that mean in theory that we should be a heck of a lot more careful what we do? I would think. Because at the end of the day, as King Solomon says in Proverbs, we don't know what today's going to bring. We certainly don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. So therefore, a person should repent today because you don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. We have no idea. So we have to be ready. See, but this is a little bit of a consolation. And that is because we're not choosing fantasy. We're not interested in fantasy over here. We want to do the right thing, even if the repercussions could be absolutely catastrophic. We don't want them to be that way. But guess what? if we're holding somewhere in the world, we will be held more accountable. That's what we said last week. We're going to be held more accountable because we know better. Person will say, better I not know better. But if you don't know better, you're only going to get punished. Won't be the same. But there's no free lunch. You're going to get it either way. You're going to get it either way. And then God's going to say, how come you didn't look into the Torah? How come you didn't look into the world? How come you didn't do this? So you pay a price. Won't be as severe. Depends what you do. But you will pay a price, right? There is no free lunch over here. Now, we mentioned before the sin of the golden calf, right? We spoke about the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu prayed, and Moshe Rabbeinu prayed, and what happens? He was only able to save half, right? Half of our sons. Now, if you go according to that reason, you could say, isn't it true the sin of the golden calf was already atoned for? God already gave atonement. He gave atonement. How do I know? Because Aaron brought a sacrifice on the altar. And God's presence came and ate it up. So you see, when he brought the sacrifice, what happened? God ate it up. So to speak, he brought this fire down. So didn't that show to the majority, to the masses? It showed that what sin of the golden calf is atoned for. If the sin of the golden calf is atoned for, so why is he taking the punishment out on the two sons of Aaron? Right? Right, that's the question. If so, then that judgment of wiping out his sons goes by the wayside. Then we should rip out that verse in the book of Deuteronomy. Totally rip out that verse. Why? We already see there's atonement. There's atonement for the sin of the golden calf. If there's atonement for the sin of the golden calf, why did Aaron's sons die? Why should they die? Right? Because the reality is, says Rabbi Chaim HaKadosh, if you nullify the reason, you nullify the punishment. You nullify what's around it. In other words, the reason over here, they sin with the sin of the golden calf. What are you talking about? It's already been atoned for. If it's already been atoned for, then that decree is nullified. If the decree is nullified, no punishment. Right? Let's just keep in mind before we get to the answer. And that is, there's certain mitzvahs, that a person may do today, or maybe not do, if the reason does not apply. Right? In other words, there's a difference of opinion among rabbinical authorities. If the reason for the mitzvah does not apply, some rabbinical authorities say we don't have to do it. Examples by my Machroni. The afterwater, the person washes for bread. They wash their hands, sanctify their hands. They eat bread. And before they say grace after meals, they wash their hands again without a blessing. Now, what's the reason? A lot of people use salt, heavy in salt, worried. You ate the food with your hands. You didn't wash off your hands. You might put your hand in your eye, scratch your eye. That's dangerous. That's a dangerous situation. So the rabbi said, in that case, you don't have to keep it. You don't have to do it. Now, other rabbis say, okay, very good, but today that reason doesn't apply. But now the question is, if the reason doesn't apply, if it doesn't apply, do I still have to keep the mitzvah or not? So there's a difference of opinion. Some rabbis will tell you, you don't have to do it because the reason doesn't apply. Other rabbis will tell you that even if the reason doesn't apply, who says the rabbis gave that was the only reason? Who says it was the reason? We see over here there's 6 answers, possibly 7th answer. Why Aaron's sons died. Could there be other answers? Could be. Could be 100, could be 1,000. Right? But even if the rabbis gave one reason, does that really mean that's the only reason? Could be a number of reasons. Just because this reason is nullified does not mean that the whole thing is nullified. Could be a million different reasons. Right? I just throw that out there because over here we're saying if the reason doesn't exist, i.e., sin of the golden calf has already been atoned for. If the sin of the golden calf is already atoned for, then why are they going to get punished? Why are they going to die? Sin has already been atoned for. Comes on the Rabbi Chaim Akadosh, and he says a very scary proposition. And he says there's such a thing called chut asara. What is chut asara? That a person can be judged even by a hair's breadth. Right? A hair's breadth is something very, very small. Right? So what do we see? We see that something like this, that even if it's something very small, it's enough for God's character trait of judgment to come and punish a person and potentially wipe them out. Very possible. You tell me it's something really small, something really insignificant, right? Seemingly insignificant. But doesn't God judge the righteous chut asara by a hair's breadth? He does. Right? He does over here. So therefore, even something really minor, even if it's something really minor over here, it's enough justification in God's mind. It's enough justification to wipe them out. Or to wipe out any other righteous person. Why? It could be something unbelievably small. Doesn't matter. Even if it's something unbelievably small, God over here says, okay, even if they did something small, I'm still gonna judge them in a tremendous way. So, even so, even though they're so righteous, God does not save them. It says in Rabbi Chaim Akadosh here, even if they did it by accident, they got too close to the mountain. They brought this strange fire, or drew close, whatever it was. And God wanted to sanctify them, even if they did it by accident. Now, there are certain things you do by accident, right? You weren't 100% sure, right? In this case, let's say Kohen goes into the Beis HaMikdash when they're impure. They weren't 100% sure of the status, or they didn't know their status. They walk in liable for death penalty. They're going to say it's not fair. They weren't aware of this, that. You're right, it's by accident. But who says by accident such a severe thing? They're not liable for death penalty. Right? Who says? Right? Who says that's the case? Why should that be the case? Right? Definitely shouldn't be the case. Says the Rabbi Chaim Akadosh over here. That's exactly what happened. Wasn't it done on purpose? And even if you want to say it was done on purpose, 100% it was done for the sake of heaven. They weren't doing it as a rebellion. You could say they got so caught up in themselves and the spirituality of the time, right? The putting up of the Mishkan. They felt, let's go into the Holy of Holies. Okay, they did something they weren't commanded. But at the end of the day, very hard to say that they should be liable for death penalty. If I could say, if I wanted to, right, that's really what's going on here. And that is, God said, don't do it. God was not interested in them doing it. Doesn't matter what their reason was. And it's irrelevant why they did it. And they did it for the sake of, sake of heaven and Kabbalah and all this stuff. At the same time, God did not want Adam and Eve to eat from the tree. But Adam had a claim. He said, if I take the evil inclination inside, every time I do the right thing, and the evil inclination is inside of me, what happens? Then every time I go against the evil inclination, spiritually, I raise myself to unbelievable spiritual levels. I uplift the body, I uplift the soul. But God forbid I do the wrong thing. I debase the body, I debase the soul. It's like taking 5 steps backwards. Now, comes along God and says, you, the best of my creation, you're a heretic. What do you mean I'm a heretic? What do you mean? I'm going to be a heretic. God gave him a command. God told them not to eat from the tree. Now, doesn't God understand if they put the evil inclination inside of them, that potentially they can raise themselves to higher spiritual levels? 100%. 100%. What does God say? God says, no. He says, I don't want you to do that. And they did it. And what was the consequence? One act. Even though they thought they know better, and even if God agreed, they brought death to the world. So God had to go to plan B. He had to go to plan B. That's all what God wanted. Doesn't mean God necessarily disagreed with his idea. He might have agreed. So what? He still didn't want him to do it. Wasn't interested in him doing it. But whatever reason, the scary part over here is, even by accident, a righteous person on their level can be taken even doing something by accident. You're going to say, but why is that fair? You know why it's fair? Because they're judged on a totally different level. Totally different standard. And therefore, they should have been more careful. They should have been a lot more careful. Well, the people wouldn't be considered a sin at all. Okay. Or not as drastic, let's say. Have to be liable for the death penalty. Well, what did we say last week? Right? We sort of beat this down like a dead horse. Beat it like a dead horse. We said the closer you are to the king, the more severe the repercussions when you mess up. So someone will say, well, I don't want that responsibility. Okay. Right? You can not take that responsibility. You have other issues. Whether it's a Jew or a non-Jew. A Jew, secular Jew can say, I'm going to break that covenant. I don't want to have anything to do with that covenant. I'm going to live however I'm going to live. I'm going to roll the dice. Whatever happens, happens. I'll do my best to make a living. This, that, fine. No guarantee for anything. Fine. But they want to live their lives based on what? On desire. That's all they want to live for. Eat, drink, and marry, lest tomorrow I die. That's all they want. So they're also going to get judged. But not the same. God will give them all the fantasy, give them any mitzvah they've done in this world. He has to give them reward for it, and then he'll wipe them out in the next world. Potential. Right? So they can do something by accident. They don't even know it's forbidden. And all that. God's not going to wipe them out. Maybe he'll scare them. He's not going to wipe them out necessarily unless there are other factors going on. But here the righteous get judged by a chut asara. They get judged by a hair's breadth. Because, as we said before, the closer you are to the king, the more liable you'll be. So, even though, I forgot to mention one other point here, but the Book of Leviticus Chapter makes, and he says, even though that the sin of the golden calf has been atoned for. So we know the sin of the golden calf has been atoned for. Why do they die? Why are they punished for that if the sin's atoned for? Because he says over here that there's still an imprint. It's still recognized in the world that the sin has been done. There's atonement, but it doesn't get fully wiped out. It's still there. Now, this is a little bit hard to understand. Why is it hard to understand? It's hard to understand because if a person sinned and God grants them full atonement, then that sin doesn't exist. That sin becomes a mitzvah, gets totally uprooted, gets obliterated. Nice, good SAT word. Gets obliterated, totally demolished. But over here, not true. Over here, there's still something left of that sin. Now, what could be left of that sin? So I can say, he doesn't say this, but I'll throw it out there. If the Jewish people were at the highest level that they were before the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, what could they have done? They could have brought the Messiah. The sin of the golden calf, that wiped it out, and that's where we're holding today. We're still holding by the facts. We don't have a Messiah. But not only that, but I can say, well, since we don't have the Messiah, that's still recognized. Still recognized in the world. It doesn't say that. Right? But the explanation could be the fact that it's still recognizable. The fact that the sin of the golden calf, you still have the Erev, they get destroyed. Mixed multitude get destroyed. Right? But God says, if I go amongst the Jewish people, I'm going to wipe them all out because of the sin of the golden calf. So what does God do? So God said, okay, I'll make a pshara. I'll make a compromise. What's the compromise? Compromise is I'll mete out the punishments of the sin of the golden calf throughout all generations. Till the Messiah comes. Because if God goes amongst the Jewish people, the entire Jewish people are going to get destroyed. Totally get destroyed. So what does God do? He says, okay, I'll have mercy. Instead of wiping out the Jewish people, I'm going to punish them for all generations. Collectively. I'll mete it out, every year, every 5 years, whatever. I'm going to mete out that punishment for all generations. Now, what would I say on that? So I would say that based on that, it's still around. We're still paying for the sin. We don't see it. You'll tell me there's been atonement, but there's not full atonement. Doesn't seem like there's full atonement over here. Not only that, says the Rabbi Chaim further. He says, still, Aaron's not allowed to go in the inner courtyards, right? Only by the altar to get, and that's where his sons died they got atonement, right? God gave atonement over here, and that wiped out the sin. In other words, he's not allowed to go in. He's not allowed to go closer. They die over there. So that wipes out what is recognizable about the sin. But if not for that Aaron is on such a high level, right? It's hard to understand, right? He said, if that would not be the case, then how could Aaron raise himself such a high spiritual level? There's still something there at some level. Whatever that is, right? Whether you tell me he couldn't go into the inner courtyard, and that's still recognizable, even though, God ate the sacrifice that Aaron gave. So you see, there was atonement, but you see, he can't go wherever he wants. He's limited in certain things. So based on that, what do we see? We see that there's a limit over here to what he can do. So therefore, the sin at some level still exists. Otherwise, how would we say Aaron's on this high spiritual level, right? Which he is. No question. This knocked him down a bit. Very small amount, but sort of knocked him down a drop. If we're going to say that, right? If we're going to say that. Not only that, he says that Aaron comes over here, he's only sanctified above. How is he sanctified above? Through his two sons, the death of his two sons. And that's why the Torah says, right? It says in this verse, chapter 16, verse 1, it says, Acharei Moshe Shnei Bnei Aaron. It says Bnei Aaron, the sons of Aaron. Right? What does it mean, the sons of Aaron? So there's already a hint to atonement. Atonement for the sin of the father. At whatever level that sin was. He said that explains what we said before. And that's why God does not give this command up until now. Right? Because we said before, if you look at Leviticus chapter 10, what does Leviticus chapter 10 tell me? Leviticus chapter 10 tells me they brought a strange fire. God takes them. Then in verse 8, Leviticus chapter 10, verse 8, what does it say? They drank wine. Not allowed to drink wine. Right? Lest you die before you serve in the temple. So now, up until this point, we mentioned a few of the reasons, but then the Torah tells me by the Ber Hashem el Moshe, Acharei Moshe Bnei Aaron. It says that God spoke to Moshe, doesn't tell me what he said. After the death of the two sons of Aaron, why now? Why all of a sudden is it brought up over here? Seems superfluous, bring it up over there. Right? You're going to speak about it over there, chapter 10. Speak about it over there. Why is it brought up over here? Because Aaron wasn't fitting. Right? He wasn't a whole, so to speak, back then in Leviticus chapter 10. Now the fact that we see the reason for the death of the two sons of Aaron, right? And they're called the sons of Aaron. Why the sons of Aaron? To atone for the sin of their father. But that wasn't the reason from beginning to end over here. Right? In other words, we see different reasons. Either they brought a strange fire, either they drank wine, whatever the case was, before they served in the tabernacle, the Mishkan, etc. But we're not given a reason from beginning to end. Right? Meaning that their death, we're given different reasons possibly. But we're not given the reason that they atoned for the sin of the father. That we're not given. It's not mentioned. It's not mentioned. Right? So here the Or Chaim HaKadosh says, oh, it wasn't mentioned from the beginning to the end about their death having to do with the sin of the golden calf and all that. But rather what? That's really the first reason. That's really the first reason. So what about all these other reasons? These other reasons are just causative. That's what the Torah is pinning on him. Pinning on the two sons. Right? Why did they die? Either you tell me they brought a strange fire. Either you tell me they came too close to the altar. Either you tell me they drank wine or whatever the case is. Right? All these different reasons. But is that the reason they died? That's not the reason they died. What's the reason they died? Sin of the golden calf. That's really the reason. Everything else is just sort of causative, right? So to speak. What caused them to die? What was the action that they did that caused it? Right? They were too close. They did other things, but that's not the real reason. That's just the Torah giving the reason. But what's the real reason? Sin of the golden calf. So you have to understand why that's not mentioned directly. But I will mention, just a side point, this might be a long side point here, right? But I'll mention anyway. And that is a person, a person dies. Person dies, God forbid. Now, why the person died? They'll say heart failure. They'll say, cancer, secondary cause pneumonia. Well, they'll say COVID. They'll say, any number of reasons, right? Person got killed, God forbid, in a car accident, got killed that way. A lot of different reasons. A person can die. Now, is that the reason? No, that's the cause. That's the cause of death, right? Person got mashed in a car accident. Person died of disease. I remember once, I asked my Rabbi son, a person dies. I said, what they die from? He goes, what do you care? They're dead. Abishah took them. God took them. That's the reason. No other reason. Right? And that's true. Because if it's a person's time to go, they say in Israel, the surgery was successful, but the patient died. I had a friend of mine that had to have a lung transplant and was only 60 years old, but whatever, had to have a lung transplant. And the surgery was successful. They missed a little microbe in the lung. The lung was infected. Wasn't something they could have picked up. So they couldn't sue the hospital. But what happened? His immune system was very weak. It killed him. In the end, it killed him. They're going to say, but he did what he was supposed to do. He had to go through surgery. Nothing to talk about. So how long is the person going to live with a lung anyway? A new lung? Okay. That doesn't really matter. But you see, something happens where you're going to say that was the cause of death. You know what the cause of death was? No matter how strange it looks, doctors could have done this, doctors could have done that. Doesn't matter. Why the person died? Because God took him. Could have taken him in a totally unnatural way also. I know a great rabbi had a number of years ago slipped on a piece of ice, had to have knee surgery. Knee surgery was successful, then caught something else in the hospital and died. Had nothing to do with the knee surgery. Something else, totally random, seemingly. But what happened? That's what God wanted. Took him. So you'll say the reason is he caught this. He fell, broke his hip, couldn't do surgery, died from that. Or died from this, died from that, died from the other thing. Could very well be. But that's not the reason he died. We give that a reason. Oh, he had lymphoma. Yeah, that's the cause. That 100% is the cause. And then it shuts down the entire body. Right? I get it. To say, a person had cancer. Secondary cause of cancer, we mentioned pneumonia. Why they die of pneumonia? Because when they put in hospice, they're given very little to eat and to drink. They're not killing them directly, but they're giving them very little. So what happens? They can't fight it off. They die of pneumonia. Is that direct? No. It's indirect. Would they be liable? No, unless they starve them to death. Then they'd be liable. Doesn't matter if they're going to die in 2 weeks or a month. But if you starve them to death, they'll die. Right? That you're not allowed to do. But they die of a secondary cause. So I once asked the doctor this question. If they die of such a thing, is that murder? Is that considered murder? And they said that, a person goes to hospice, doctors know how much to give and how much not to give. Really? They're not allowed to starve them. That's murder. Right? They have to give them, give the patient a certain amount of nutrients, a certain amount of liquids for them to survive. Even though they're going to give them the minimal, they're going to get, a second degree cause and they're not going to be able to fight it. Usually. They won't be able to fight it because they're too weak. If they do it direct, that's murder. If it's indirect, it's not murder. They say, well, the person's going to die anyway. You're right. But what are we going to say? What's someone going to say? That's the reason. Their organs shut down. This happened. That happened. No, that's just the cause. That's just the cause of death. But why did they die? Why essentially did they die? Because God took them. That's why they died. But we look for reasons. That's what the Rabbi Chaim here is saying. The Rabbi Chaim Makadosh over here. He's saying we're looking for reasons. Right? It could be they drew too close to God on the mountain. They could have brought a, what do you call it? A strange fire when they weren't commanded. They could have drank wine before they served. All these different reasons. Is that the reason? No, God took them. That's just seemingly the cause. That's just what's around the whole thing. That's not the reason. I mean, we're looking for a reason. That's true. What potentially the sin was. But you know what? At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter what the sin was. Even though we're trying to understand, to the best of our ability, what's going on here. But at the end of the day, it's just the reason around it. If it's a reason around it, it's not the reason. You know what the reason is? Because God took them. And he judged them kachuta Sarah. Like a hair's breadth. That's what he did. Totally judged them like a chuta Sarah. Now we're trying to figure out why. What potentially did it. And at the end of the day, as my Rebbe's son said, doesn't matter. I mean, we're trying to understand Torah. It's a different issue. Right? But when someone dies, does it matter what they died from? You say, oh, it's so tragic. Person 25 years old, died in the car crash. I just heard a story. Somebody I went to camp with. Actually, it was after my time. And he died snowboarding. Mid-20s. As well after my time. But, so I saw a whole write-up that someone put up. It's tragic. I mean, who thinks they're going to die snowboarding? Unless you're Sonny Bono, you don't know how to ski and you go into a tree. That could happen. Lose control and, go splat into a tree. Right? It's also, if you know how to ski, it's not so common. You're going to say, slipped on a piece of ice and look what happened when splat 60 miles an hour, 100 kilometers an hour into a tree. Yeah, the odds you're going to survive that probably not so good. So I don't know what happened in the snowboarding case. Doesn't matter. You know what? You'll say, slipped on ice, did this, wasn't careful, whatever. Whatever it was. You know what the bottom line is? That's just the reason. You know what the real reason is? Because God took him. Now, why? I have no idea. Right? I'm not in his head. I don't know what he did in his life. God took him. So, over here, we're looking for the reason. But he says, so as the Rabbi Chaim, that's just the sign. That's just the sign why they weren't saved. Right? What they did to maybe cause it, whatever. But that's not the reason. Because the reason really isn't mentioned. And what was the reason? Sin of the golden calf. So we have to understand why the sin of the golden calf not necessarily mentioned. Directly. But all these other things are going around, trying to understand what's going on. Okay. I'm just showing you the bigger picture. When we see something happen, whether a person dies tragically, they die in their sleep, they die young, they die old. You know why they died? Because God took them. Why? Because of any number of reasons. But my Rebbe said many times, you know why people die young and old? Because they all die at the same age. No one would ever do tshuva. No one would ever repent. So we don't know. Things are hidden. Very much hidden. Tremendously hidden. But he said that's only a grum. It's only a causative thing. It doesn't mean that's it. That's the reason. Right? Because he says they might have made a mistake by accident, drawing too close, or bringing a fire they shouldn't have brought. Right? Whatever the case is. Right? In order to tell you that's what we're seeing as the reason. Right? Right? But the reality is, there really wasn't the reason. The reality is, he said it was the sin of the golden calf. Right? And all these other things combined, God took them for that. But that's not really the reason. Right? It's just a causative thing that God says, okay, I'm going to knock them off for this. This is really the reason. The other things, causative over here. So, we get caught up in, all these different things. And I'm not saying that they're not legit. People want to know, why is this happening? Why is that happening? What's the measure for measure? What's the measure for measure? Someone points out, this rabbi, this Reform synagogue was known for interfaith work. Okay. Is that the reason that they got stormed over there? Could be. Could very well be. I'm not saying not. Right? But I'm not a prophet. Not a son of a prophet, at least not that I know of. Right? The God hasn't told me. Could be a million different reasons why. But you see, the irony is no one's killed. I'm not saying people should have died. Right? I think they got the shock of their life. In the middle of their prayer service, whatever they were doing, someone comes in, takes them all hostage. That's, no one expects that. Totally no one expects that. I remember Rosh Hashanah. I'll give an example happened to me. I mean, it didn't happen to me, but, Rosh Hashanah, my parents' synagogue, a lot of people come. That's when they come to synagogue. So, the parking lot's full, parking on the street, this and that, and someone, I don't know, the truck driver, whatever it was, wanted to park somewhere, and someone, I don't know, took his space, whatever. So someone was trying to placate him. The guy took out a bat. Rosh Hashanah. Like, I don't know. I don't know if he felt threatened. I don't know exactly what the story was. There's a whole thing. There's a whole fisticuffs. On Rosh Hashanah of all time. Right? Of all days. There's a whole fisticuff going on. Is that important? Your parking space? Right? Yeah. You could say there's a lot of imagery. Synagogue's not a real synagogue. What are they doing? It's mixed. It's mixed. It's this and that. You're right. That guy didn't come in and start bashing people with it. Nobody got killed. Nobody even got injured. I don't think anyone got injured. But there was a whole thing. You know what God can do? He can use someone like a stick. Scare the daylights out of people. Right? But I saw this week, or the end of last week, right, we brought down this parsha by the Brisker Rav. And someone asked from America, someone came to Israel, asked the Brisker Rav the following question. He says, all these irreligious Jews in America, if God would only do miracles, if he would only show them miracles, then they would change. They would show change because they acknowledge that God's doing for them a miracle. So what did the Brisker Rav say? Brisker Rav said, no dice, my language. So not true. Not true at all. Why? Because the Brisker Rav said if a person's totally steeped in garbage, if they're totally steeped in their own desires, if they're totally steeped in their own desires, if God would show them a miracle right in front of their face, they're going to try and figure out how it's been done. Somebody like that, you could drop a nuclear bomb on their head, it doesn't go off, they're not going to change. Maybe some will, but in general, the Brisker Rav says it's not going to happen. The only way it's going to happen is if a person thinks into their actions. If a person thinks about what's going on in the world, what the real purpose in the world is. Not about, do I put ketchup or mustard on my hot dog? Or wild card weekend, right? Anyone knows, football, America, whatever, right? That's a big thing going on now. That's what people are living for. Whether the team's in it, they're not. That's what life's about. So you think if God showed them a miracle, God showed these idiots a miracle, you really think they're going to change, says the Brisker Rav? Never. Never. Why aren't they going to change? Because the biggest question they may ever ask in their lifetimes, I put ketchup or mustard on my hot dog. That's where they're holding. A miracle? Nah, come on. It's not going to do anything. Now, the only way it would, says the Brisker Rav, the only way it's going to happen is if the person is looking into what life's all about. If it doesn't look into what life's all about, it's not going to help. And he takes it one step further. If I remember correctly, he said it in his name. Right? We brought in his name. Could be wrong, but I think he brought it in his name. And that is that let's say we have family we want to pray for, that they should become religious, they should become Noahites, whatever it is. So the answer is, according to Brisker Rav, if I remember correctly, so he said if that is the case, It's never going to happen. You know why it's not going to happen? Because they're not looking into things. If they would be a vessel to look into things, then the brisker Rav says that'll help. Your prayers will help. If they're not looking into things, it's a blessing in vain. Your prayers aren't going to go anywhere. Now, not everyone agrees with this. Right? Other rabbinical authorities say we can still pray for them. We can still hope that they repent and that nothing bad should happen to them, but we should pray that they repent. Says the brisker Rav, how could that be? They're not holding it anywhere. Nowhere in the world. Zero. So if that's the case, my prayer, God's going to answer. Why would he answer? Ketchup or mustard on my hot dog. That's where they're holding. Waste of a blessing. Waste of a prayer for them. Not everyone agrees, but I'm just pointing out. I'm just pointing that out. We have to know what to pray for. Right? We have to see the world in the right way. That's the point. If we see the world in the right way, does that mean every last thing's going to go my way? No. I can tell you from personal experience, and personal experience friends of mine, changed their life. It didn't make it easier. Spiritually, different thing. A friend of mine became religious, parents totally cut him off. Totally cut him off. Would help him nothing. Father, passed away, never met his wife, his kids. Mother never came to the wedding, but, eventually met his wife, and kids. So where's the open-mindedness? Where's the open-mindedness over here? But forget that. That doesn't really matter. But the point is, what are we living for? And people make this excuse all the time. I mean, I hear it a lot. What people say. The older we get, when a person's born, the clock is ticking. The clock is ticking. So the older we get, we see people around us, maybe childhood friends, other things, they pass away. I know someone, in the early 80s, like all their friends, they're dying, or pretty much have died. Now, you would think, okay, a person at the end of their life, however long they're going to live, should live to 120, they should be well, but they see their own mortality. They think it's hard to do this, hard to do that. Okay, are they changing their life? No. They're into playing cards, getting together with other people, whatever. These are wake-up calls. Some of it are more tragic. Some of them are less tragic. They're all wake-up calls. Right? This thing that happened in Texas, huge wake-up call. Even though people were killed. You don't think people there suffer a tremendous amount of trauma? A nut job. A nut job holding people hostage. You don't know if they're going to get out alive or not. We're free game. Jews are free game. Nobody cares. Nobody cares what happens to us. But we have to care. We have to show God doesn't matter what he does. Doesn't matter the difficulty. Right? We're still going to press forward. This friend of mine, parents cut him off. Well, guess what? Became a massive, massive Talmud Chacham. Massive, massive rabbinic scholar. Gone through all of Shas. Gone through the entire Talmud. Right? He's big Anav. Is very modest, very humble. Got married a little bit later. Unbelievable. His family totally cut him out. Totally cut him out. So a person could ask the question. And say, so where's the justice? Right? Where's the justice over here? Change your life, I lose all my money? Is that fair? Not about being fair or not. God didn't come to me in a dream and say, well, you know what? I'm going to make it all up to you in about 20 years. You're going to move to a community. You're going to pick it almost by accident. And guess what? On the same street, two of your kids are going to marry in two different families, one building away from another. I say, okay, great. That's not exactly how it happened. I was thrown around the world. Some of my own choice. I made bad choices, whatever. All these different things. I didn't sign up for this. I don't have regret. I don't regret all the people I helped. And God forbid I would say I regret all the mitzvahs I've done. God forbid you say that, you lose everything. You lose all your mitzvahs, so I get that merit. I still get that reward. But to think for a split second, God's going to give it to us easy, not a chance. Not a snowball's chance in hell. Never going to happen. Not going to happen. And most people know. I don't have to speak about this. Most people know. They say, but it has to be this hard. What did we say before? We said that the closer you are to the king, the harder it is. Potential converts go through this. What does God want to see? Even though they get tossed around like rag dolls, what do they want to see? What does God want to see? He wants to see self-sacrifice. Person may be on their knees. They may be scrounging around, having difficulty, maybe with health, maybe with livelihood, maybe marriage, maybe everything combined. Right? Just like Abraham, we went through all these tests, and God's like, Abe, what do you think of my covenant? Oh, don't forget, I saved the best for last. Circumcision at the age of 100. Wow, what a covenant. So God said, if I made everything so easy, everyone's going to join. But see, we have to be careful. Because as we see in this week's Parsha, that we're going to read in Parshas Yisro, we are God's chosen people. We're totally God's chosen people. We're a light into nations. So let's look at history. That's why I called all you, a bunch of wackos, right? At least the non-Jews who want to convert. Why? Look at Jewish history. Been an absolute disaster. Disaster. Okay, we had the first temple, we had the second temple, we had great people. Avram, Yitzhak, Yaakov, we great rabbinic scholars throughout the generations. But you look at the scope of the pure destruction of the Jewish people, right? It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable what we see. Nebuchadnezzar came, Babylonians came, destroyed the temple, wiped the Jews out, sent them into exile. That should have been it. Should have been it. Should have been anything left to the Jewish people. Thing is, they come back, right? They end up coming back. They have respite for a while. Then the Romans, they get thrown out. And then they go through pogroms, all over Europe, other places, Holocaust, pogroms. Say, wow, what a covenant. But you know why it's such a covenant? It's such a covenant because we got greater responsibility. And we have to stand out and be exemplary. I mentioned this last night in Perkei Avos. We have to be exemplary. We do not want to have one iota of any reason whatsoever for a secular Jew or a non-Jew to say anything against us. Nothing. Not the way we drive, not the way we behave, not the way we stand in line. We don't want to give them any fodder. None. You're going to say, what, I have to be perfect? Yeah, we do. We are the chosen people. We have to stand up. And if we don't, very well could be a desecration of God's name, right? Not by the strict definition. So you're going to say, but it's an awesome responsibility. You're 100% right. It is. It's an awesome responsibility. And whoever signs up and is the real deal, unbelievable. I have the utmost respect because I know people don't have it easy. They don't live in communities. They can't move. They have difficulty, family, this, that, all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, if a person knew, and I'll throw this out there because I think I know what the answer is. I'll tell you what my answer is. I didn't tell you the question yet. Right? The question is, if we knew this what was going to happen, and we knew our lives were going to be thrown upside down, totally upside down, something we never would have signed up for, not in a million years. Would a person still have signed up for it for the pursuit of absolute truth? Now, I'll tell you my own experience. I would say 100% I still would have signed up. With all the difficulty, I still would have signed up. Now, I would have wished certain things would have turned out different. Okay. We're not in control. Now, some people may get broken by it. They just may get broken down by life. It can happen. It can happen. But if someone understands it's a higher purpose, there's a greater purpose than what I do. Even if I get tossed around like a rag doll. Who's signing up? And what should be the answer for everybody? No matter what they've gone through, they're signing up. You know why? Because they're the real deal. They're not looking for fantasy. They're not looking for a wild card weekend. They can care less about wild card weekend, even if your team is still in it. Because that's not what reality is. Right? Reality is we got to take responsibility for what we do, for what we say. You know what? If we don't uphold what we're supposed to do, don't you think God can come down and pluck some of the greatest people of this generation, even if they're much younger, even if they haven't started families, this, that, because he wants to pluck the best so more people don't die? Can happen. Can happen. I see so many people. Fantasy. All they want is fantasy. They want things based on desire. They don't want to be told what to do. So what's going to happen? They'll do whatever they do. God will deal with them how he deals with them. But the question is, so look at other people's lives. People have changed their life. They've worked very hard. And what do they have to show? What do they have to show being tossed around like a rag doll? I'm not saying it's all bad. I don't want to go that far. It's not all bad. It's a lot of good. I don't want to get zapped here. It's a lot of good. Tremendous amount of good. I was speaking to some people earlier, when I was learning, just, giving them a little bit of strength and, in different things. I was talking last week also, the fact that, a connection with one of the Gedolei Hador, one of the Torah giants of generation. By me, where I came from, that's not a small thing. Not a small thing. We're going to say, didn't every time you listen, you came out smelling like a rose? No. Not even close. I was called a fanatic. He was called other names, different things. Why are you listening to him? I know someone was very close to him. And the wife's father, multi-billionaire, said, I'm willing to give you all this money, just don't listen to Rabbi Sternberg. You imagine? They said, well, tough noogies. We're still going to listen to him. Kind of like Rabbi Kiva, Kabbalah Savua, cut him out. Totally cut him out. Right? I mean, in the end, he got what he deserved, but, a person thinks mistakenly, I'm going to change my life and everything's going to go accordingly. Doesn't work that way. You're going to say, well, isn't life about being fair? No. Because the point over here is, not to get lost in all my parables over here, right? The point is these things are hidden within hiddenness. We don't know. We have no idea. Someone will point out, don't you know? This rabbi's doing interfaith work. Okay. So why did God get him this way? He didn't die. Right? I don't think he died. Right? So God just scared him. He scared his whole congregation. If they really deserve a death penalty, why didn't he wipe them out? Should have wiped them out. Take care of them. He does a great job. It's probably terrible things. Other things. The guy didn't want to do that for whatever reason. You see what happened in California, right? A year ago, a couple years ago, whatever it was. 3 people died. 3 people died. That was an Orthodox synagogue. So why does God make a point there and not a point over there? Don't know. I mean, God, I think, scared the wits out of people there. I don't think there's any question. These people will probably be scarred for life. And they'll say, oh, we should have security. We should have this. Should have done that. They're taking God out of the picture. Now, someone could say, well, isn't that the reason? I would tell you, if I knew the answers to these things, do you think I'd be wasting my time in a YouTube video on a Sunday? I'd be world famous. I'm only a YouTube rabbi. That's what some people say. He's only a YouTube rabbi, okay? But I'd be world famous if I knew these answers. I could speculate. You know what? That's all it is speculation. That's all it is. But here we see an amazing thing. We see an amazing thing. Now the reality is, why did the sons of Aaron die? And there's a lot more to speak about here, which we're not going to get to, but we'll get there next week. Right? You look in the bigger picture. We look in the bigger picture of things, what do we see? We see people die young, people die old, people die suffering. You know, people die recklessly. Recklessly. How many people die a year under the influence of drugs or alcohol? A lot. Just a horrific story I heard. You know, I don't know, 12-year-old girl, 9-year-old girl, I forget how old she was. Coming back from something on a Saturday night, killed by a drunk driver. Car smashed, killed by a drunk driver. We have an answer for that? I don't have an answer. Is she a sacrifice? Yeah. For what? No idea. See, we have to know how to look at things. And when these things happen, you know, we think about it too much, we'll never get out of bed. But at the same time, we got to see what's going on in the world. Things are heating up. Been heating up for a while. You know, COVID gave us a little bit of a break from all the anti-Semitism. You know, everything was in shutdown, lockdown. So anti-Semitism went down at that point. But now everything's open. Yeah, we're fair game again. God's knocking on the door. Because he knocked on their door. He can knock on our door also. Because we need to be better. You know, and just because we see something and they say, oh, look, person was driving, they were texting, you know, lost control of the car, went into a guardrail, flipped over 5 times and died. You can say, okay, what's the cause? They were texting. Forget road conditions, right? They were texting, lost control. It's a tragedy. Now, you're going to say, well, that's the reason the person died. That's not the reason the person died. That's the cause. The reason is because God took them for whatever reason. But he just did it in that manner. Right? That's what the Rabbi Chaim here is telling you. That they were destined to die anyway. Either to sanctify God's name or for the sin of the golden calf, which we're going to have to, you know, get to why it's not mentioned. See if we come up with an answer or not. But a lot of these other reasons are just causative. But they're not the reason because there's something else going on. Right? The Rabbi Chaim over here said, he said it's a tremendous amount of hiddenness over here. Unbelievable hiddenness. We don't know. We don't know. We're given hints. Still, there's something left of this sin somehow that doesn't get totally erased, even though God ate up his sacrifice. Right? But there are a lot of things that are tremendously hidden. You know, and I'm not saying, oh, we just live by a leap of faith. Right? That's for the Christians. Our faith is based on knowledge. But I want people to understand, because I hear this, I can't even tell you, from so many different sources. I hear the same thing over and over. I'm going through this, I'm going through that, I'm going through the other thing. I want to know why. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know why. God says, Moshe Rabbeinu says, I want to understand your character traits. God says, no one can see my face and live. You can always see me from the back. You can always see me in hindsight. So I would say, based on that, if Moshe Rabbeinu can't see God face to face, and he's not going to understand why God does this and does that, does the other thing. So why do you think we should? Now, some things might be more obvious. We do something, sometimes it can be right in our face. Right? What the measure for measure is. Most times, I guarantee, we'll never figure it out. Never. I'll say like this. If a person was taking stock of their life every day, and they would write down what they did, how they spoke, how they interacted with others, where their thoughts went, how they made blessings, how they kept Shabbos, different things. And they did it for years and years. They might have a bigger, you know, maybe a closer understanding, maybe. because they see things that they've done. But you know what? As we say in Yom Kippur, Shemona Esrei of Yom Kippur, God doesn't forget. He doesn't forget anything. We may forget. Plenty of things we forget. Right? There's no question. We may forget. God doesn't forget. So now you want to say, but I want to understand what the king does. So now I'm going to get a little bit offensive. Then I'm going to say, but who are you? Wouldn't we all like to pick God's brain? We would. Not going to happen. Whatever happens, my Rebbe would say, you're in God's army. That's it. You do what he says. You know what? The end result? Pray. Work on yourself. Work on character traits. Give charity. Do chesed. Do acts of loving kindness. Pour your soul out to him and work hard at whatever you feel you need to fix up. And tell God you want this thing taken away. But to understand why, we're not going to understand why. Most likely in 10 lifetimes, we're not going to understand. Someone asks, interesting question. Can a person still be close to the king if he doesn't face enough trials? Yeah, I think though, people may delude themselves saying, I don't have any trials. Person should think. Guarantee there are plenty of trials. They just don't, maybe this is easier for a person. Maybe that other thing is easier for a person. Doesn't mean they don't have trials. Doesn't mean that. Right? Whatever trial we face and we overcome, we're close to the king. Now, are there people that go through more trials than others? Probably. That could be. Could they be closer to the king? Yeah. But even if someone only went through, a small amount of trials, which I don't believe, but let's just say a person went through a smaller amount of trials, they can still be close to the king. They're going to be held responsible at their level. We learned that out from Yishmael, of all people. Because the angels want to destroy him, want to kill him. When he's a child, God says, "You liable?" Says, no. Angels say no, so they can't kill him. All right. What about what he's going to do in the future against Jews? What about all the Muslims, what they're going to do? God says, you're right, but I can't kill him now. He's not liable. Because the verse over there says, Basher Hu Sham, where he's holding now. Right? Not in the future. So does that mean nobody, some people don't have any trials? No, doesn't mean that. Even if they would have less trials, I don't think it matters. They're still going to be close to the king. It just might not be as a high level. All right, so it might not be as a high level, but I think people tested him anyways. I think people, may be unaware of all the trials we go through on a regular basis. I could go through a whole laundry list. I don't want to scare anyone, of what our basic obligations are in general. I'm not going to go through it, but, if we would really think and understand, as the Chol Zavavo says, we don't do a quarter, a third of what we're supposed to do. And you still wonder why are you getting tossed around? Right? So we all have trials. I don't think there's any question. I think a person would have to think, okay, you got up. Did you get up like a lion? Did you get up to pray? Did you get up to this? Where are your thoughts? Are you looking at things you shouldn't look at? Speaking to people you shouldn't speak to? Reading things you shouldn't read? I told you I'm not going through the list. I go through 100 things. And I guarantee 75 to 80 we're in trouble. We're in trouble. I heard someone say today, I heard a great rabbi say that, when you pray, he said, if we're lucky, 28% of the time, maybe we have proper intention when we pray. Forget Kabbalah. I don't think we don't fulfill your obligation, that your mind doesn't want it. 28% of the time, he said. He said 28% of the time is pretty good. If you're a baseball player, you're batting 280, that's not bad. Let's say it's 33%, that's even better. You think you're going to have higher than that? You got to work on it. No one says you don't have to work on it. He's just talking about one thing. Where is our mind when we pray? Does our mind wander? It's a trial. It's a trial. Prayer needs always to be strengthened, the Talmud says. Very true. But it's something we have to work at. So I don't think a person has no trial, but at the same time, they may not see it as a trial. They can say, a secular person, they do all kinds of things wrong. They see it as a trial? No, because they don't care. So they're just going to do whatever their heart desires. But if we understand better, we know. We know what a trial is. I mean, I'm not saying it has to be, such a trial that if you don't pass it, you're liable for death penalty. I'm not going that far. A person makes a blessing. Utter the words properly. Understand where the blessing's going. Have intention when you say God's name. God, past, present, future. Right? God of judgment. God's king of the world. Simple intention. Forget about Kabbalah. Simple intention. Can a person say they've done that properly all day long? Someone can say, yeah, I have. Okay. Maybe that's not your trial. Maybe that, okay. Are you doing things by rote, which is akin to spiritual death? Are you excited every day? You do as Hashem b'simcha? Serving God with great joy when you get smashed upside the head sometimes? The list goes on. Like I said, I'm not going through the list. I can come up with countless examples. Make people feel like an absolutely piece of dirt. I'm good at that. I'll listen to what I say also. But that's the idea. That 100% is the idea. Because we all have trials. Nobody doesn't have any trials. Nobody. Now, even if you want to say, well, I got smaller trials than other people, I got other trials that I've gone through or less. Doesn't mean you don't have a connection to the king. Well, let's think like this. Even if a person had fewer trials and they passed them, God's going to give you more difficult ones. And they won't be the same year in and year out. Sometimes they'll overlap if you don't overcome this, that. True. No one gets off scot-free. And the closer you are to the king, the harder it gets. Isn't that comforting? The harder it gets. We come to Yom Kippur every year, and we're beating our chest for certain things that we've done. Hopefully the list has changed. Hopefully we're not doing the same things as last year. Maybe we do, maybe they overlap, whatever. But see, if we're really growing, we're going to have different trials. If we're not growing, they have a similar one. But see, even if we pass them, they don't always go away. But even if they do go away, there are others that have come up, they're going to be more difficult. Much more difficult. Right? In other words, if we're beating our chest for the same things year in and year out, that's a problem. That means our spiritual growth is being stagnated. That's what it means. Nobody wants to be spiritually dead over here. Nobody wants to do things by rote. Right? No question. So we have to be able to know how to look at the world properly. And there are so many things hidden in the world today. Boggles the mind. So many different things going on. What does it show? It shows one major thing. And this is what we all have to realize. And that is, we're not in control. There are very few things we're in control of. The person wants to work on fear of heaven, right? This is what they should say every day. God, you're the one in control. Say it many, many times during the day. No matter what happens, you're the one in control. Because that puts you in a certain frame of mind. Especially when life beats us down. See, if life is going easy, do I say God's in control? No. I'm not going to say no, but in general, when things are hard, we say, God, you're the one in control. But is he in control when things are good also? We just don't look at it that way. Because everything I did by my own hands, the work of my hands, right? Which the verse in Deuteronomy says. Right? I'm going to say, I did it myself. Big mistake. Taking the major X factor out. Yeah, I'm going to stop there. We're going to have to continue with this Orach Chaim next week. Any questions on any of that? Or any general questions? Someone mentions he accidentally washed a meat pot and other meat dishes with hot water and soap. Contains goat's milk. Well, if the hot water and soap hit the pot first before the goat's milk, then it shouldn't be a problem because then it's a caustic cleaner. It won't have any damage. If the milk hit first, yeah, then you would have a problem. Then you would have a problem with mixture of milk and meat, right? That you would have to kasher the pots. But if the dishwashing detergent hit the pot first and then the hot water hit it and hit the milk, then yeah, that wouldn't be an issue because once it comes in contact with that, it's not edible, right? No one's going to eat it because it's already got dishwashing soap in it. So that wouldn't be a problem. But if that wasn't the case, then you have to kasher everything. You have to kasher the, you have to get rid of the soap. Soap wouldn't be kosher, right? You have to get rid of the soap. The pot should be kashered if it's splattered on the pot. Should kasher the pot. If, again, I was talking about the soap itself. So if it's real dairy, right, and it was hot, yeah, that's a problem. That would be a problem. Soap, if any meat hit it from the pot for using 24 hours, should get rid of the soap. Should kasher the pot. That's what I would say. Yeah, any other questions? All right, there are no other questions. I'm going to sign out. I do this every Sunday, 9 o'clock Eastern time, 4 o'clock Israel time. We're going to do hopefully Tanakh talk in a little more than an hour and 20 minutes, something like that. And then no Hide Nations after that at 2:30 Eastern time. Again, anyone has any questions, find me on Facebook, Michael Chaim Kaufman, or Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism. Send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com, RBBICHAIMCOFFMAN @gmail.com. Wishing everyone a good beginning of the day, end of the day, or almost end of the day, depending where you are. And everyone have a great rest.